Hi, this is Simon Canish and welcome to another Marvelous Videos. Before we go ahead with the main contents of today's video, let's break down a few things first. For those of you wondering who or what a night owl is, they happen to be fictional superheroes appearing in the DC comic book maxi series Watchmen. So far, there have been two versions of the night owl, a creation of the celebrated duo Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. Hollis T. Mason was the original and the first night owl, while Dan Dreiberg became the second night owl in the main Watchmen storyline. Fans of the character will know that both versions have already made their live-action appearances in Zack Snyder's 2009 super thriller movie Watchmen. Well, gear yourselves up for today's video where we will be delving deeper into the origins of Night Owl. Please know that this will be an intriguing in-depth analysis of both versions. So, are you ready for this? Let's dive in right now then. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, then please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you, and let's begin. Origin of the first night owl, Hollis T. Mason. Mason initially started as a New York City cop in 1938, and to be honest here, he was more than excited to take up the life of a vigilante. Having been thoroughly motivated by characters like Superman and Hooded Justice, he earned his nickname Night Owl because of a couple of reasons. For starters, he used to spend most of his evenings working out extensively at the police gym. Next, he would hit the sack every day at 9, only to wake up at 5 in the morning and wear his uniform and badge. Now, putting stress on his attire, it was fashioned in a manner that guarded his head, chest, and abdomen area, all thanks to this really tough leather tunic. Whilst the tunic kept his hair covered, Mason also wore a domino mask to have his identity hidden. In the middle of the year 1939, he became a member of the crime-fighting team of heroes, the Minutemen. It would only be fitting to address Mason as this old-school crime fighter, one who enjoyed being a costumed adventurer and went ahead fighting a horde of criminals, such as Screaming Skull and Captain Access, to name a few. Mason eventually retired in 1962 to be a car repairman and penned down a narrative titled Under the Hood, recounting his former team and their crime-fighting exploits. It was after reading Mason's memoir that Silk Spectre, the second of the vigilante team, crimebusters came to know of team member comedian's attempted rape of her mother, Sally Juniper, or in other words, the first Silk Spectre. It was Halloween night in 1985 when the street gang Knot Tops were all under the influence of the KT-28 drug, ended up attacking Mason, believing that he had helped break the noir, private detective-themed vigilante Rorschach out of prison. In reality, it was Night Owl 2, Dan Dreiberg, who had organized the rescue mission in order to free his best friend Rorschach after he got arrested. Mason did not even have the slightest idea about anything, so when he heard the pounding on his door, he assumed that they were trick-or-treaters, but to his complete shock, he found himself under a violent attack. Of course, Mason did put up a great fight and lasted as long as he could, but with the gang leader Durf hitting him on the head with the very trophy that was awarded to him as an acknowledgement for his service as a costumed adventurer, Mason passed away. Origin of the second night owl, Dan Dreiberg. For a proper understanding of the character, we will be exploring all 4 issues of the comic series before Watchmen, Night Owl. Please know that we will only be focusing on Daniel Dreiberg's origin story here. The year is 1962 and Dreiberg is first introduced as a teenager, having dinner with his parents. Dreiberg's father in particular wants more out of his son and tells his wife that not only did he have a job when he was 17 years old, but he was also making good money. With Dreiberg going to his room upstairs, the readers quickly discover who his role model is, and that's none other than the original night owl, Hollis Mason. Dreiberg's obsession with Mason makes him go to extreme lengths, like planting a tiny microphone device on Mason's owl car so as to track him down to his base of operations. Oh, in case we've got to mention this before, Dreiberg is an aficionado of gadgets, and he's often seen relying on his commendable technical skills. Coming back to the storyline, Dreiberg's plan works out in his favor, and he's able to locate Mason's base. Dreiberg is seen leaving a message for Mason asking him to meet him at a given location. When Mason reaches the venue, Dreiberg tries his best to impress his role model by telling him how easy it was to locate him. Dreiberg further tells Mason about his inventions and that he wishes to work with him as his sidekick. While Mason states to him that he'll certainly think about it and that he believes he has potential, he also lets Dreiberg know that had the latter not been a kid, then things could have gone quite badly for him and that he would probably probably have ended up shooting Dryburgh to keep his secret identity intact. The next scene has Dryburgh reaching home to find his father beating his mother using his belt. This is when the readers learn that Dryburgh's father had a nasty habit of physically abusing his wife. Upon entering his room, Dryburgh discovers it to be empty and that his father has set all his Night Owl stuff on fire. As Dryburgh watches his beloved items get incinerated right in front of his eyes, his mother comes up to him and casually tells him that his father had a heart attack. The mother and son are seen holding off calling for an ambulance. After the funeral service, Mason meets Dryburgh and informs him that he is aware of the latter's abusive childhood, while further adding that time has come for him to get his training started. Mason is seen dynamically coaching Dryburgh, and by the looks of the extensive training, it does give one the idea that Dryburgh's getting trained to become Mason's sidekick in all probability. Soon arrives a day when Dryburgh learns of Mason's retirement on the television while at dinner, and it comes as a total shock to him. He rushes to Mason, who ultimately tells him that his time to retire has come and that he wants Dryburgh to pick up exactly where he leaves, so that the name Night Owl does not fade. Mason tells Dryburgh that he wants him to take his place, and the only thing required for that is Mason helping him finish his training, so that the latter is ready to take up the mantle of Night Owl. The story jumps forward 2 years and Dryburgh's seen as the new Night Owl for the first time. After Dryburgh's done beating up the thugs, he's seen getting back inside his owl ship, only to bump into fellow costumed adventurer Rorschach. With Rorschach offering Dryburgh help as a partner, it is only fitting to say that the duo eventually end up becoming the closest of friends. Cut to 1966, the two of them arrive at this meeting that they were sent an invitation for by the hero Captain Metropolis, who had plans for recruiting the second generation of superheroes into a new team known as Crime Busters. The meeting unfortunately does not go well, or as planned, as everyone is seen going their separate ways. Now, if you ask us, the only thing to take away from this meeting was the fact that Dryburgh crossed paths with Silk Spectre, and while he instantly did fall for her, he did not make a move on her. Dryburgh and Rorschach are next seen thrashing a bunch of thugs, when one of them manages to slip away and attempts to hide somewhere. Dryburgh goes after the thug only to bump into stark naked Twilight Lady, who has managed to incapacitate the thug by then. Rorschach also manages to reach there by then, and upon seeing Twilight Lady completely uncovered, he loses his calm and calls her a whore. As Rorschach aggressively rushes towards the Twilight Lady in order to hit her, Dryburgh stops him from doing so, and Rorschach angrily leaves him there. With Rorschach coming back to his apartment, we get a quick peek into his origin story as well. His mother was in the prostitution business, and every night she had a random man at her place. No wonder Rorschach had a troubled youth, and his reaction to the Twilight Lady was more like an outburst of his pent-up emotions. Coming back to Dryburgh's storyline, we find him narrating his encounter with the Twilight Lady to Mason, who tells him that she is nothing but trouble and that Dryburgh should stick to busting con artists, stick-ups, and bank robberies instead of getting entangled in the Twilight Lady's tainted world. A few days pass by and Dryburgh gets reports of a young woman murdered in her apartment. Dryburgh goes to check on the crime scene and learns that the woman was a hooker. Upon inspecting her body, he finds bruises all over it. In fact, some of the bruises are on top of other bruises, and this somehow gives him flashbacks of his mother getting brutally assaulted by his father and still not reacting to it. With Rorschach coming to the crime scene and informing that there's been a bunch of other girls getting killed and all of them have been involved in prostitution, things take a different turn. Add to this the indifference of the witnesses of crime, and the police are not doing anything about it just because they are hookers, and at the end of the day, the readers also keep getting further glimpses into Dryburgh's origin story through flashbacks that emerge every now and then in the issue. For instance, we get to see how Dryburgh was always teased by his friends in school for being a total geek. He was even bullied for thinking that he could be like his role model. Of course, things become a little too intense one day, and Dryburgh kept fighting back against his bullies, only to come back home completely bruised and drenched in blood. Dryburgh's mother tried to cover up her son's bruises by putting makeup on him, and it's later that we learn that Dryburgh's parents had only got married to each other because his mother was pregnant with him. Coming back to the present events, Dryburgh, having had enough with the series of prostitute murders and nobody doing anything about it, reaches out to the Twilight Lady, who, in case you didn't know, ran a brothel. And it goes without saying that she decided to help out Dryburgh with the case. She even tells him that she has a clue on who it could possibly be behind all the murders, further stating to him that she herself will take it upon the perpetrator's house. The story is next seen shifting towards Rorschach, whom we find working at a church. The reverend of the church comes up to him and is seen telling him how the world is going absolutely crazy, while stressing on on issues such as immorality, spiritual decay, sex, drugs, and permissiveness. As for the duo of Dryburgh and the Twilight Lady, we find them at this luxurious property of a Colombian man named Carlos Onofrio. Apparently, Carlos has set up a prostitution ring on the south side of the city, and Twilight Lady tells Dryburgh that Carlos is his man if he has to question somebody regarding the murders, and leaves from there. Dryburgh deals with Carlos on his own and gets out a few numbers from him. Later that night, Dryburgh is finally seen bonking the Twilight Lady, and before they are at it, they are seen taking off each other's masks. The Twilight Lady recognizes Dryburgh and tells him that they met at this party last year, where he was buying some parts for a scientific thing that he was working on. The Twilight Lady has remembered Dryburgh's face since then, and also assures him that his secret is safe with her. Moving ahead with the storyline, we find Rorschach working at the church when the Reverend tells him to go to the sub-basement and move up a few marked boxes from there to his office. Rorschach is quite surprised, as the Reverend usually never lets anybody go down there, but with the Reverend addressing him as his good and faithful servant, Rorschach does what he is asked. But when he opens the door to the sub-basement of the church, he finds a heap of dead bodies of women. To his absolute horror, it becomes crystal clear that the bodies belong to the very women of the prostitution ring, and that the Reverend is behind all the killings. Rorschach hurriedly changes to his vigilante costume, but before he can take the next step, the Reverend appears from behind and fires at him. He further tells Rorschach that he had simply sent him down to test him and see if he would be on his team and help him make the city a better place. No points for guessing, Rorschach failed in that task. The Reverend ties up Rorschach and states to him that he will be dying for a worthy cause. The readers, along with Rorschach, finally learn why the Reverend killed all of them. The Reverend narrates how he once met up with a woman who was part of the prostitution ring. She came at a price of $200, and while the Reverend initially thought that it was economical, he did not realize that he had already stepped on the trap. The woman, upon figuring out that he was the pastor of the church and that the church that he works for gets a lot of monetary donations, started blackmailing him. When she demands $1,000 per week and threatens that she will destroy him otherwise, the Reverend gets freaked out and ends up strangling her to death. But that's where the twist came. The Reverend had no intentions of stopping himself after that, because by then he wanted to kill all the sinners, burn them, and send a message to God. Now, when we say sinners, that includes the young prostitutes, the older ones, and even young men, for that matter. Because of the Reverend, they were all fuel for the flames. Cut to the present, the Reverend is seen setting the entire basement on fire, including a tied-up Rorschach, and the readers learn that the Reverend's ultimate plan to put the whole blame of his actions on the vigilante. While the Reverend is seen to leave from there, we find Dryburgh and the Twilight Lady making their way towards the church in Dryburgh's owlship. A certain clue had pointed the duo towards the Reverend, and they just wanted to check things out. While Dryburgh and the Twilight Lady are not only able to save Rorschach in time, they are also successful in subduing the Reverend. Okay, not exactly subduing. Rorschach ends up impaling the Reverend with the signboard that states "The end is nigh," resulting in his death. While his actions come as a complete shock to Dryburgh, Rorschach tells him that he did what Dryburgh would not and could not do. A few days later, Dryburgh is seen meeting Rorschach on a rooftop and discussing the golden rule of how heroes don't kill. Rorschach tells him that there are many times when the line really needs to be crossed, and to make things right, one has to do wrong things, further stating that, unlike him, he isn't afraid of crossing that line at all. Dryburgh decides to amend things with Rorschach because at the end of the day, he believes that everyone is entitled to make one mistake. Dryburgh leaves from there to meet the Twilight Lady, and by now, it should be clear to you that he has already fallen for her. But with Dryburgh reaching the Twilight Lady's place, he finds it empty. The Twilight Lady had packed up all of her stuff and simply vanished from there. The previous near-death experience also made her give up on her would-be career as a superhero. It was via a phone call later that the Twilight Lady had conveyed to Dryburgh how she just could not afford to fall in love, given her profession, and bade him goodbye. The end of the comic series has the readers forward to a few years when Dryburgh is romantically involved with the second Silk Spectre, or Laurel Jane. With Laurie asking Dryburgh about the Twilight Lady, he is seen lying to her about her. Not wanting to disclose that he loved her, Dryburgh told Laurie that the Twilight Lady was just a criminal who was obsessed with him. Marvelous story arc of the Night Owl, the escapades of Dryburgh, Laurie, and Rorschach. It was only after Laurie ended things with Dr. Manhattan that Dryburgh finally made his move on her, and the duo began a romantic relationship with each other. Now, the passing of the Keene Act in 1977, a decree that banned vigilantes, Dryburgh had initially retired from his vigilante life, only to make a comeback after the murder of the comedian. Here, we like to stress on the fact that it was the death of the comedian which set into motion the events of Watchmen. Anyway, coming back to Dryburgh's current activities, he is seen returning back to vigilantism, along with Laurie, and one of their first ventures happens to be successfully rescuing the residents of a burning building. This charged Dryburgh with the same level of excitement that he used to have earlier while fighting crime, along with some very passionate feelings for Laurie as he ends up sleeping with her. The duo are later seen helping Rorschach break out of prison with the sole purpose of thwarting Adrian Veidt, or should we say Ozymandias' plan of saving the world from itself. While they were successful in their rescue mission, it unfortunately led to the brutal death of the original Night Owl, Hollis Mason. The death of his role model came at a huge blow to Dryburgh, and he became absolutely violent. He was hell-bent on revenge, and it's only fair to say that he got his score settled with the knot tops at the end of the day. The duo of Dryburgh and Rorschach was seen journeying to the Antarctic fortress of Ozymandias, where they fought against him but were quickly incapacitated by him. It was then that Ozymandias disclosed his real plan to the duo, releasing a telepathic monstrosity in New York which will unleash enormous psychic waves leading to the death of half the city, with Dryburgh stating to Ozymandias that he will stop him. He was informed that the whole event had already taken place. Millions had died, and all the nations of the world had joined forces to fight against the extraterrestrial menace. Dr. Manhattan had also arrived there by then, and Dryburgh was left with no other choice but to keep the whole thing a secret in the interest of world peace. With Rorschach trying to take the Owl ship and leave from there, Dr. Manhattan was left with no choice but to kill him in order to prevent him from leaving. Dryburgh and Laurie accepted the hospitality that Ozymandias offered the duo, and as for Dr. Manhattan, he was happy to see Laurie in a relationship with Dryburgh, after which he departed for another galaxy. It was towards the end of the 1980s that Dryburgh and Laurie, having been assumed to have died in the attack, took on new identities as Sam and Sandra Hollis. With a surname, the duo paid respect to the late Hollis Mason. They are also seen traveling to California to visit Laurie's mother, who happens to be the first Silk Spectre. Laurie not only amended her relationship with her mother regarding her discovery that the comedian was her father, but she, along with Dryburgh, also vowed to come and pay her a visit sometime soon. What happened after the events of Watchmen? After the events of Watchmen, Dryburgh and Laurie had completely given up on their vigilante lives. As Sam and Sandra Hollis, they had finally settled down and even had a daughter, whom they named after Laurie's mother. The duo had also adopted a boy named Clark, who in reality happened to be the biological son of costume villains, the mime and the sadistic Marionette. After the villains were imprisoned post an unsuccessful bank robbery attempt, Dr. Manhattan noticed that Marionette was pregnant. Dr. Manhattan could foresee that the child within Marionette actually had a bright future in front of him, and he wished to conserve his future. After the child's birth, he took him, gave him the name Clark, and raised him until he hit his teens. After passing on powers to Clark, he sent him to the Hollis family, and the rest is history.
Oh, this is getting heavy.
Night Owl's appearance in Watchmen 2009 movie. We've already mentioned this before, that both versions of Night Owl have appeared in the 2009 superhero thriller movie Watchmen, one that was directed by Zack Snyder. While popular actor Patrick Wilson is seen playing Daniel Dryburgh, also known as Night Owl 2, it is Stephen McHattie who plays Hollis Mason, or the original Night Owl. Speaking of Dryburgh's role in the film, he is shown as this technologically advanced, dependable, dictated and endearing vigilante with a genius-level intellect, taking the mantle after his role model Hollis Mason. After the Keene Act was passed in 1977, he seemed to have been lost in retirement, but in due course he found a new purpose in life after crossing paths with Silk Spectre, who became his lover. The character of Night Owl 1, or Hollis Mason, appears as a supporting cast in the movie. The former member of the Minutemen was seen owning and living over an auto shop, and it was Clint Carlton who portrayed the young Hollis Mason, mainly in flashbacks. For those of you who are yet to see the flick, please note that Mason's murder was not shown in the theatrical version, but if you watch the director's cut, you will find the scene featured there. Night Owl's appearance in Watchmen 2019 TV series. Technically speaking, his character does not appear in the 2019 superhero drama limited series Watchmen, but as per the supplementary materials, it is disclosed that Dryburgh and Laurie had called it quits in the 1990s. This was solely because Dryburgh wanted children and Laurie wanted to continue fighting crime. In 1955, both were arrested for disobeying the Keene Act. Later, Laurie became an FBI agent, while Dryburgh continued to be in federal custody. This was established in the third episode of the series titled She Was Killed by Space Junk, where Senator Joe Keene Jr. tells her that he can have Dryburgh released after becoming the President of the United States. There's more to this. The supplementary materials also show that Dryburgh had sent this teasing gift to Laurie, a vibrator that he had designed himself and fashioned especially after Dr. Manhattan. Last but not least, in case you were not aware, the company Merlin Corp was actually Dryburgh's. He secretly owned it.
All right, huh? Just because I'm wearing that doesn't mean
What makes the Night Owl so powerful? Well, mind you, we will be focusing on Dryburgh here. To begin with, he's an absolute genius. Being an admirer of gadgets made him the inventor of a horde of creations, the owl ship, the weapons, and all the crime-fighting technologies. He's also well versed with electrical engineering and mechanical construction. Apart from the things that we have mentioned, he's also a skilled acrobat. He can overcome any criminal with his proficiency in martial arts, which includes boxing too. Well, that was the story of Night Owl, and with this, we finally come to the end of our video here. So which version of Night Owl do you prefer more? The original and the first Night Owl, Hollis T. Mason, or Daniel Dan Dryburgh, Night Owl 2? And if you liked our content, then don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.